In this video, I'm going to tell you about the city that no one wants you to know.
City that is so underrated, and I'm going to compare it with a few major cities, including Singapore, where I was born and grew up in. Watch till the end to find out if people are actually gatekeeping the city, or is there a reason why the population here is relatively low. The city that I'm talking about is Perth, Western Australia. It's the second most isolated city in the world. I'm not talking about a holiday destination, but actually a place to live in as for long-term, living-wise. But first, we're going to compare Perth against Sydney and Melbourne, two of which the most popular destinations to migrate in Australia. So why not Sydney or Melbourne? First up, there's too many people.
The work-life balance is definitely not that great compared to Perth.
Watch this, or this. Sydney has a people density of 428.6 people per square km, and Melbourne, being the most dense, has a people density of 504.3 people per square km. Trains are so packed in Sydney during peak hours. It's just hard to drive around with so many traffic, and you'll be waiting in traffic for like a few hours. One of the reasons why Perth is great is that it has a people density of 346.7 people per square km.
And Singapore has a people density 24 times of Perth. Can you imagine that?
I previously lived in Singapore for 20 years, and I love cities myself. You can see through my Instagram, I love cities and I love the bus. But after I got into like my mid-20s, I feel like
The preference for a certain type of lifestyle starts to shift.
So Perth was like Sydney back in the days, like 1990s probably, where like there's a balance in lifestyle. The shops here closed at like 5, most shops here. And then only recently that the shopping centers decided to extend their opening hours to 9 p.m. on certain days. Being a city that is not so developed compared to Singapore, if you work here and if you build your own business, you have a competitive edge over the others if you hustle.
So if you're looking for a place to chill and hustle, Perth is the right place for you. Here's a quick summary of our first point. If you're still watching, please like, subscribe, or turn on the bell button. It will help a lot for me to keep making these videos. Hope you enjoy them.
When there's more people, what goes up? Houses. A similar place you can get in Perth would be 2 or 3 times more in Sydney, and Singapore is similarly expensive. Where houses are expensive, rentals are going to be crazy. A 1-bedroom apartment in Sydney will set you back around $400 to $600+. Whereas with that same amount of money here in Perth, you can get a whole villa to yourself.
Houses in Sydney is expensive, Singapore is expensive, Perth is your best choice.
Let's move on to the next point, which is cars, transportation. So talking about cars here, in Singapore, it's super expensive to get a car. You get this piece of COE and it already costs you $100,000. You still have to include the cost of your car. It's almost impossible for young people to have a car unless they take up loans. In Sydney, cars are almost similar to Perth. A reliable second-hand car can set you back $7,000, $8,000. You can get a car easily, less than $10,000. And if you're like me, most Singaporeans, we don't know how to drive. You can definitely get a driver's within $1,000 in Perth. The public transport here in Perth is definitely not as good as in Singapore. Singapore to me by far is the best transportation system. I don't think any country can beat that. In Perth, the trains and buses here are decent. They get you around. The buses, they don't run as frequently, especially certain routes. They run every hour if you are like in the metropolitan areas. Good to time, you always have to watch your Google Maps.
And even then, sometimes it's really confusing. For example, I want to take bus 998 and it says here that it's disrupted. Okay, Google didn't tell me that. I reached the bus stop and I called an Uber. Just when the Uber is about to arrive, guess what? The bus came.
Come on, man.
Cars-wise, learn it in Perth, get a car in Perth, but public transportation, Perth is just decent, Singapore is the best.
Here's a summary for transportation. Having your own car is the best.
They come here and they get a shock of their lives. Like, what is it to do here?
That brings us to our last point. What is there to do in Perth?
Honestly, if you lived here for some time, There's so many things to do here. So many great beaches here in Perth and in Western Australia. WA has regularly been voted as having the best beaches in the world. The shoreline of beaches in WA is 10,194 km. And guess what is the distance between the west and the east of Singapore? It's only
49 km.
So imagine how big the beaches are in WA. We have the Turquoise Bay, which is rated #1 best beach in South Pacific. We have the Misery Bay, which is the world's most beautiful beach in 2022. We have Cable Beach, where you can sit on the camels and enjoy a beautiful sunset. We also have Lucky Bay, and then there's also Hellfire Bay, often known as one of the world's best beaches. So there are lots of beaches in Western Australia for you to explore, and they often have very clear waters and very white sand. There are markets, festivals, many things to do like other cities, and I even tried a hand at setting up a store. Who says there's nothing to do in Perth? The beaches in Singapore. Sydney does have beautiful beaches too. So for weather, I would prefer being in Sydney or in Perth, whereas in Singapore it's just humid all the time. So are people actually gatekeeping the city? You be the judge.